Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Der Shusterman, Stuart Weitzman and the History of the Jewish Shoe Industry, hosted by the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center at American Ancestors. My name is Rachel King. I'm the Executive Director of the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center, and I will be your moderator this evening. The Jewish Heritage Center is a research and educational center dedicated to preserving New England Jewish history in our archives, exploring Jewish heritage, and illuminating the American Jewish experience for wide audiences. We are located in Boston at American Ancestors, a national center for family history, heritage, and culture. Tonight, we have a wonderful program in store that brings together several very special elements. First, a focus on the history of the Jewish shoe industry in Massachusetts, which is near to our heart at the Jewish Heritage Center, as we have many fascinating collections in our archives documenting the shoe industry and including everything from photos and documents to, and you'll see some of those photos in a few minutes, to shoe patterns and molds and tools. Secondly, it is always a pleasure to learn from the preeminent American Jewish historian, Dr. Jonathan Sarna, who will provide some historical context for our conversation tonight. And thirdly, we are honored to welcome famed shoe designer Stuart Weitzman and to hear his insights about family and his career in the shoe business. So, history and shoes, what is not to love? Before I turn things over to Jonathan and Stuart, I just want to share a few housekeeping notes about this webinar. You in the audience will be muted, but we welcome your questions. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many as we can following Stuart and Jonathan's presentation. And also, as we are all broadcasting from different locations, please bear with us if we experience any technological issues. Even if you do miss something, we will send you a link to the full recording of this session afterward. So now it is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce our two speakers this evening. Stuart Weitzman is a shoe designer, entrepreneur, and philanthropist who began his career in his father's shoe company in Haverhill, Massachusetts. He went on to build a global shoe brand that has been worn by millions of women around the world, including such celebrities as Beyoncé, Kate Middleton, Meghan Markle, and Taylor Swift, and many more. Stuart approaches his extensive charitable endeavors with equal dedication, supporting a wide range of hospitals and research centers, youth organizations, and cultural institutions. Stuart and his wife have demonstrated their special commitment to Jewish history through transformative support of the now named Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia. Dr. Jonathan Sarna is university professor and the Joseph H. and Bell R. Braun Professor of American Jewish History at Brandeis University. He is also chief historian at the Weitzman National Museum in Philadelphia, and he also chairs the academic advisory and editorial boards of the American Jewish Archives. Among his many publications, he is author of American Judaism, A History, and Lincoln and the Jews. Jonathan Sarna serves on the Advisory Council and the Research Fellowship Committee of the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center. Jonathan will share some history about Jews in the shoe industry, and then he will be in conversation with Stuart Weitzman. So without further ado, welcome, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's really a great honor for me to be here with Stuart Weitzman, who is perhaps the foremost women's shoe designer in the world. And we're going to talk this evening about his family's contribution to the shoe business and some of the shoes that he designed and made famous. But before we do that, let me offer a little bit of history of Jews and shoes here in New England. Goes all the way back to English colonists who brought their shoemaking skills to New England back in the 17th century. And in those days, shoemaking flourished in places characterized by long, cold, snowy winters. And you had to make it through the winter, and residents needed hardy souls, that's a double meaning, and they needed indoor occupations, like the making of shoes, to turn long winter months when farming was, of course, impossible into something remunerative. Shoemaking back in those days was often a family affair. Men would do the cutting, their wives the stitching and binding, and shoemaking became a cottage industry, especially throughout Essex County, sometimes at home. And then there were these 10-foot by 10-foot shacks where artisan shoemakers would practice their craft. The development of sewing and stitching machines, which of course grew out of sewing machines, totally transformed the shoe industry in the middle of the 19th century. And then came the Civil War, and that created new demand for shoes and boots, just by the way, as it did for ready-made clothing. And thanks to the new machinery, shoemaking consolidated, and it became much more of a mass market industry with shoes produced in factories, no longer in private homes or little shacks. Probably the most important innovation was the Mackay Stitcher, a machine that revolutionized the speed of footwear production by having a machine sew the uppers to the soles rather than doing the job by hand. And as we move through the 19th century, the job of producing shoes was industrialized according to the best production methods of the day. You can see that on the screen, broken down into many different steps and processes on a kind of conveyor belt system. So instead of the venerable shoemaker artisan who made the whole shoe, there were now what the census called shoe workers or mass production workers who toiled on just one little piece of the manufacturing process and then passed the shoe on to somebody else. So there was one study that found 100 different workers working on just one shoe from start to finish. Now, this kind of mass production greatly improved efficiency, reduced prices, made it much easier to bring in and train new workers because you only had to learn how to do one thing. But it also created a great deal of labor strife. So in Lynn, which was a big shoemaking center, there were actually 57 strikes just between 1920 and 1923, and you can see some of that on the screen, although it's a little earlier. Moreover, innovation drove out of the field a lot of the old, proud Yankee artisan shoemakers that couldn't or wouldn't compete, and that, of course, created opportunity for immigrants like the Jews. In addition, mass production led to the separation in manufacturing of men's and women's shoes, which then and now were made and shaped differently. So the manufacturers of women's shoes clustered in Lynn and then especially in Haverhill, in other words, north of Boston, and to the south, say Brockton, became a center of the manufacture of men's shoes. Now, East European Jewish immigrants were attracted to the shoe business, really, almost as soon as they come to North America in numbers in the 1880s. Some of those East Europeans had skills. They'd made shoes back in Europe, and immigrant aid organizations in New York, like HIAS, would encourage those with shoemaking experience. You go and move up to Boston. There are lots of jobs there. Other immigrants arrived with experience in the clothing industry, and that could be put to use in the shoe industry. They both involved a certain amount of cutting and sewing and designing. Many Jewish immigrants, though, they just needed jobs and were glad to find those jobs in an industry enjoying rapid growth with really few barriers to entry. And the reason there weren't barriers is that anything to do with the foot, including podiatry, then known as chiropody, was, and forgive me if any of you are in those industries, but it was low status in America. And that's allowed Jews to find an available niche in the shoe trade. And of course, that proved very, very fortunate for Jews and for anyone who moved into the industry at that time, because America's population literally doubled in 40 years from 1880 to 1920, from 50 million to 100 million. And all those new feet needed shoes. So the market grew very rapidly. In 1911, there was a study that counted 240 million pairs of shoes being produced annually in the United States. And the shoe factories here in eastern Massachusetts, Haverhill, Brockton, Lynn, and elsewhere, they produced 100 million of those shoes, which means roughly 40% of the shoe output came from these areas. Now, that shoe industry, and some may even remember this, was characterized by lots of small competing firms, many of them producing shoes for one or another department store or shoe store. And then what would happen is that individuals would gain experience, they'd accumulate capital, they'd break away from the firm where they'd been an employee, and they'd form a new shoe manufacturing firm of their own under their name. And we see this already early in the 20th century. The Haverhill Record, the newspaper, in 1910 reported, quote, during the last 5 years, the complexion of Haverhill's shoe district has slowly but surely undergone a change. The irrepressible Hebrew man has invaded the district, purchased various branches of the business, and today is competing with the longer established manufacturer and merchant. And what happens over time in the 20th century is that lots of irrepressible Hebrew men moved up the ladder to success in precisely that way. Success was certainly not guaranteed. Many went bankrupt, which was also true in the garment industry. But those who found a niche, in other words, a specialty in which they could excel, they enjoyed great financial rewards. Now, on that high note of great financial rewards, before the later 20th century post-war collapse of the shoe industry in the face of cheap foreign imports and high domestic labor costs that drove shoe manufacturing abroad. But on the higher note, I want to bring in now our guest, Stuart Weitzman. I met him when he stepped in and really saved what is now called in his honor, as you heard, the Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History. As you'll hear, he is deeply interested in history and heritage, as is his wife, Jane. And let me join now Rachel in welcoming you virtually to the Weiner Heritage Center. And I want to begin by asking you to tell us about your family's history in the shoe manufacturing industry. Maybe start with your dad and then tell us the story.
You know, Jonathan, you actually told my family's history. Now, I will tell it a little more specifically, but exactly what you said about working in a factory and learning the trade and having the ambition that Jewish people seem to have generation after generation. He left the company he was working for that had a factory in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and opened his own down the block, hired a lot of the workers. I'm sure that wasn't a happy note for the Schiff family, but that's what he did, and started his factory in 1959. He had been at Fifth Avenue Shoe, which was the factory that made the shoes for A.S. Beck. And he was their designer and factory manager, learned enough about it, opened his own. And that's our history follows exactly what you said. You talked very well about some of the historical things that occurred, and I hope it's okay for me to add one or two. Those strikes in Lynn, for example, they gave birth to the first women's union in the United States in any industry. The ladies' boot and shoemaker industry in the 1850s was created and gave birth to the union movement throughout America. So we have some contributions other than just making ladies' feet look pretty. Now, I think everyone should also know that during some of the period you described, especially the women who often complain about their shoes daily, and they have reason to, I will say, all shoes for women were made with a 1 foot last. A last is the form on which we make the shoe. And that there was no left foot and no right foot, there was a middle foot. And can you imagine, you ladies out there, if you think that pointed toe pump is hurting you, what it would feel like with no shape to your foot, but rather straight down the middle? Now, men had two lasts about 10 years before women, but there are strong voices on the feminine side, and eventually everyone started making lasts for both feet. So that's a little history that some people don't know, and they can't imagine how can you wear a shoe with 1 foot. But if you look at antique shoes in collections, you'll see many of them. So my father, he started this factory, and he started it really for my brother and himself. I was many years younger, still in school, and they built it up, and it was called Mr. Seymour. And I'm sure there are children of people who worked in my dad's factory hanging around Haverhill somewhere. These are actually some of my father's designs that I had never seen because I was in school, that he created in Haverhill, found them in flea markets, especially the one on the upper left, the green one, is one of the favorite shoes I have. I could make it today and it would be a dress shoe sellout. Absolutely, it would be. Other people have actually asked for that. So my dad began it. I had a little of the culture of it. I had no intention really of going into the shoe industry. I was at a business school in Philadelphia. They said it was a good one, would get me a good job, and I was on my way to Goldman Sachs. But, serendipitous things happen. I often tell that to students when I speak to them. You never know when the next corner will reach you and where you should turn, straight ahead or around it. A friend of mine at college had his dad had a shoe factory in Brooklyn. He asked me to draw some sketches for his father. He saw I could draw fairly well. I was doing scenes for the Mask and Wig art theater shows at Penn, similar to Hasty Puddings. And of course, I said, I never drew a shoe. Well, why do you ask? Why you want me to draw a shoe? Well, his dad had this factory. So I drew 20 sketches and I brought them to his house over a holiday. Didn't live too far away. We were both Long Island guys. And his dad, a very European still shoemaker. His hands were calloused. He didn't design. He bought freelance, bought ideas from others. And I laid out my 20 sketches like you would fan out a deck of cards. And he picked one up and challenged me. He wanted to know who I copied it from. And I didn't. So I didn't fluster. I just, I didn't, sir. I looked at your catalog. On a page was a shoe in this design idea, and I created my own from it. Because he actually tore the sketch up and started shaking his head. No, just tore it up, threw it on the floor. And for about 10 seconds, you could hear that proverbial pin drop, which is never, you can never hear it. I'm telling you, at that moment you could. So he picked up another sketch and challenged me the same way. And I said, yes, I did. That's my design. And he flipped it onto the back side. So only the blank side was showing upward, and asked me to sketch it again, which I did. And he said, okay, pulled out a wad of $20 bills and wheeled off 19 $20 bills. That took me less than 90 minutes. And I just made $380, and my tuition was $1,700 for the whole year. I thought, maybe I don't want to go to Wall Street. And I decided to work for my brother and learn a little bit about the shoe trade. And sure enough, one of the first designs that I had given to the man in Brooklyn was, it looked to me like in the window at the I. Miller shoe store right across the street from Bergdorf Goodman, the best store in New York at the time and the perfect location. I pushed my face up against the window, looked at the label, and it was the label of the guy from Brooklyn. That was so exciting. I don't know, like maybe when Irving Berlin heard his first song on the radio, there was my shoe in the window of I. Miller. And I decided this is not going to be a year break. I'm going to learn the shoe business. And I worked in Haverhill for those about 5 years with my brother, whose factory it was with my dad. My dad had passed away just as I got out of college, and then found a home to with another company to launch the Stuart Weitzman brand. I don't know if I hadn't seen that shoe in the window, if I would have stuck with it. But $380 in an hour or so at that time, that was a lot of money over the year. Actually, I sold him more shoes than the tuition for both semesters. So it was an economic change that was beneficial, and it certainly put me back into my hobby of drawing and doing artistic things. And that's how I really got started. I owe that all to Haverhill. I think I should mention this. I would go to Haverhill every day. I lived in Cambridge, and it was Route 93, I think, was the main road up there, and you'd get into the River Road and other streets. And as you entered Haverhill, Mass., there was a sign, like most little towns have, Haverhill, Mass., founded 17 whatever, home of Louis B. Mayer. Wow, home of Louis B. Mayer, and they're proud to put it on that plaque. And I used to think, maybe I'll make a shoe or do something and be the home of Stuart Weitzman also. You never know how life can change. And just this year, the New England organization that rebuilds depressed areas, they rebuilt Mocha and Clark out there when Sprague Electric closed. Now they've adopted north of Boston as another project, historic New England. And they sent me an invitation to come to a meeting to discuss the possibility of making a shoe museum in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Okay. I looked at the invitation, and the address for the museum and the temporary office in it, because it hadn't been built yet. 151 Essex Street. If there's anyone from that area, they know just where that was. That was my father's shoe factory. There must have been many dozens of shoe buildings and accessory to shoe buildings in that town. And they're building this museum in my father's old factory. So I had to become a part of it. And I think it'll be opening sometime after the summer. And it'll be a wonderful addition to the town that has been growing again and surviving. And that's pretty much what Haverhill gave me. Now, the industry died. To be a little more specific, it died for many reasons, not just the ones that Jonathan described, but the workers were too old and their children were going elsewhere. Western Electric had opened a big plant off Route 128. Many other companies started to do the same. Raytheon went there. And the kids didn't want to work in the shoe trade. Their fathers did. And so, it's like your father can take 3 jobs, but hopes that his son goes to college. And the father who had the shoe factory hopes that his son can do something bigger. And they did. They left the industry, and we couldn't hire workers. And I remember as a 25-year-old guy saying to my brother, Warren, I'm just here for a while. I want to learn what I can learn, but it's your bit. You can have it. I'm not interested in any of it because I can't see a future with the average age of our employee collecting Social Security. And that was when I decided to find a home somewhere else where there is a thriving shoe industry, and that was in Europe. I particularly picked Spain. I had learned the language and liked the culture, and that's where I went. And I think even there, changes happened to the shoe industry that we can all be proud of. Certainly Americans did this because there wasn't I don't know of a shoe factory in Haverhill that just went out. They moved. And they were very successful. They made lots of money. They were able to move elsewhere. I was only there a couple of years, so I had to go with someone else and learn some more of the trade until I could handle it myself. And I created some things that the industry still talks about today. I'm proud of. I don't know if any of you ladies notice on the red carpets today, there's often a shoe cam, and no one ever paid attention to shoes. They just didn't. They? Who made you dress? Whose jewelry you're wearing? And your hair. Shoes may be covered by a gown or even not. They didn't get to that. So with a team of marketing people, one of whom recommended, why don't we just make the most expensive shoe ever made? And we made what became known as the $1 million sandal. And this sandal changed the shoe industry on television. That's Laura Lena Herring, one of the stars of Mulholland Drive, on the red carpet at the Academy Awards in 2002. The shoe on her foot, and right next to it shows you what it was. 464 diamonds from a wonderful diamond maker called Kwiat. They also own Fred Leighton, great diamond company. And he gave me $1 million worth of diamonds. I remember him saying, you were asking for it. I wouldn't give that to my wife, but I convinced him it was a good marketing tool. And we made that shoe, and it got noticed. In fact, Joan Rivers was interviewing Nicole Kidman, and she cut her off when Laura Elena Herring walked on the red carpet in that sandal and yelled to her, Laura, get over here. Everybody wants to see Stuart Weitzman's $1 million sandal. Well, that made the shoe important on the red carpet. And one of the things we as a company are proud to have come up with that idea and got the publicity for it. So things like that have an impact. They change an industry in a certain way. There was another shoe that I hope they can show us. It's a sandal that just 2 little strips. Took me about a half hour to design, and my technician, it took her 2 months to approve. It's the one on the right called the Nudist. And there is not a red carpet event when a third or more of the ladies aren't wearing that shoe. And that shoe was included in the 75th anniversary by Vanity Fair of the Academy Awards. In the fashion section, there was no other shoe included. It changed the red carpet. So those are things that they all came out of Haverhill. I will tell you, that shoe is a design like my father's. I have all of his sketches and all of the shoes that were put in production. I have uppers of them, which is just the top part before it's a shoe, or the actual shoe. And I used one of his designs to make that shoe. Some stories of the other two, but not that important. What I'd like to get to actually is we were a very wealthy industry in Haverhill, Mass. I do remember an article that listed Haverhill, if not the top, among the top millionaires per capita in the state of Massachusetts. So every factory, and there were so many, and not just the factory, the sole factory, the heel factory, accessory factory, ornament factory, they became millionaires over 10, 15 years. Just it accumulates. And these were 80% at least Jewish people who grew up with a charitable heritage. And I want to tell you something. I would be surprised if the Jewish Center of Heritage that has invited me to talk didn't have some Jewish donors from the shoe industry, because our hands went far and wide and supported many institutions. Probably Jonathan could tell you that there were people from the shoe world that helped build Brandeis.
Absolutely.
Is that right? Is that right, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have had probably what you did at Brandeis, but for the people in the shoe industry. Many here will know that we're in the Lown building. Philip Lown, whom I
Okay,
remember,
sure.
Knopscott Shoes, and he gave a huge amount, both in Maine, but also to educational institutions here in Boston, Brandeis, Hebrew College, and so on. Actually, I believe that there was a significant period where the shoe industry was the largest group of industrial donors to the combined Jewish philanthropies. In those days, they organized CJP by different trades, and the shoe trade was very large. We have those records, actually. And if we have somebody who wants to check it out, you could go through and see what the shoe people did year by year. So it was enormously significant. And I think you'll find the same is true at the Beth Israel Hospital. Lots of shoe people. Do you want to say more about the philanthropic side of the shoe manufacturers?
Well, it was mostly a Jewish industry, so we were always giving. We always have, and we happen to be extremely successful thanks to all these ladies who were buying our shoes. Actually, this was kind of cute. I was at the synagogue in Palm Beach on Friday night last week, and there was a lady wearing a shoe that I had made. And I said to her, wow, that shoe looks great on you. I hope it feels as good as it looks. She says, oh, it really, it does. It's a Stuart Weitzman. I said, and so am I. And she said, oh, really? She said, well, my goodness, she said, I have so many of your shoes. And I told her, you should talk to your accountant, because pretty much everything I've been earning from the shoe business, I give to Jewish charities. You can get a tax deduction. I think she took me seriously.
Yeah.
You have to be careful when you make a joke, But yes, and it's expanded out. Once we're those that left the industry, even though they went overseas, we learned our charitable trade first at home, of course, from our heritage, but the shoe industry taught it to us. I think there's an organization today called AMFAR, which really pretty much cured AIDS with all the money given from the ready-to-wear industry and shoe people. Kenneth Cole, a shoe guy, actually was one of the founders. And we have a charity called the 210 Foundation, which supported the workers, not the owners, the workers who got injured or couldn't continue working for the rest of their lives, like the veterans are protected today by the warriors, you know. That was the shoe industry. Now, the workers were not Jewish in our era, in the era after the 40s. They were Italian mostly, but it didn't matter. You know, that's what we learned, and that's what we grew up with, and it's still around today. It really is. That's how we are. So I thank the shoe industry for helping make that happen for me, and all you ladies who help. As I said, it goes to charity, so don't feel bad about buying.
Our community wouldn't be what it is today without the shoe industry, and it is, remarkable when you discover how many people had roots in the shoe industry. Leslie Stahl's grandfather was apparently one of the big leaders of the shoe industry in Lynn, and those communities.
They were major suppliers of glues, adhesives. You mentioned 100 people it took to make a shoe when that study was done.
Yeah.
We had 200 operations to make our shoe in Haverhill. We were making a high-level shoe. The highest level shoe that was being produced in Haverhill, highest price and highest level, came from our factory. And it was a 200 operation factory. You know how many workers we employed, and they did well, and they lived their lives, and they put their kids through college eventually, even though they didn't go. It was a shame to lose the industry in America, but the shoe people who found it elsewhere continue to support all those in our neighborhood, like we did when we had our own factory. Yeah.
Did folks in Spain appreciate that the Jews, in a sense, whom they had expelled once, were coming back and bringing stuff back to Spain, or was that?
I wish I could say yes. I wish I could say yes to that. But in order to make what I wanted to make, we ended up buying half of one of the best factories in that town. And he didn't have children who could continue to market it well. So he decided to take in an American partner, almost guarantee production. And I asked one of his sons, did they teach you around here about the Inquisition? This is at least 50 years ago, 45 years ago. And he said, what do you mean? I said, like Torquemada? And he said to me, Torquemada, you mean like the bar down at the end of the road? There's a bar called Torquemada. That's all he knew about Torquemada. So that's what I ran into when I got there. They hadn't seen a Jew in 500 years. It's different now. It's still very difficult for Jewish people because of the Arab population they have. But the king and the Senate, as you know, allowed Sephardic Jews to become citizens if they move there, and something like 30,000 have. And we're not talking taxi drivers, Jonathan. We're talking professors and musicians and entrepreneurs. So it's been a boom for them, and also for the Jews who got out of South America to a more free society and of the European market to deal with. It has changed in that regard. And I'm trying to use some of that shoe money. We're building a Judeo-Hispano museum in Madrid. Wow. The first one that they've had approved by the city. They encouraged it, actually. They want the tourism, and good things have been happening in that way. And Jane introduced me to David Hatchwell, who was the leader of the community there. And we're building this museum about a block from the Prado. So wow. A place to go if you go to Madrid.
So maybe this will be the last question, but you spoke very briefly about the museum that Historic New England is building in the old address. Yes. Do you want to tell people, because they're going to be able to go visit it, what you hope the museum will be, and what the plans are?
Well, it's it's going to show the heritage of footwear, and even where some of the generations later ended up still in footwear. It's going to have all my historic, some of my historic shoe collection, my original, my celebrity shoe collection, and also a jewelry type shoe collection that we made all over, Swarovski crystal collection, and some from others. It will have the machinery showing an active factory, showing how a shoe was made in those days. It's a big building, and they have big plans. And Historic New England they have the money to help make it happen, as well as donors. And I think it'd be exciting. It should open by the end of the summer, maybe before. One of my personal possessions is going to be in the opening of the museum. My father, as a young man, on his not on his own, working for A.S. Beck Shoes, designed a unique style of dress shoe, and he patented it. And he got a 35-year patent with a 15-year renewal. And I didn't know he did it, but the patent, the original USA patent, was in my mother's possessions, and we went through them all, as you do when people pass away. And I found it, and it was a terrific design, even though it was from the 30s. And I remade it like he made it. We called the shoe the Heritage, and I submitted a proposal to patent that design that I just created. And since his had expired, they patented mine as well. So I have his patent. There it is, my father's patent on one side and mine on the other. And you can see the design of the shoe. Didn't change much, quite honestly, because he created it very well. So that should be in the opening of the exhibition.
That's fabulous. All right. I bet there are people who have questions. I see a few there. So I think we maybe should send it back to Rachel, and we'll see what people in the audience want to find out.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Stuart. It's wonderful.
Thank you both so much. And there's so many stories, and I know, Stuart, you are full of stories. So thank you for sharing some of your family history and your journey. And I'm sure we'll hear more as we address some of the audience questions. So for those of you, if you would like to submit questions, please type them into the Q&A box. We have a few to start. One was actually submitted in advance from Betsy, and she adds again. Mr. Weitzman mentioned the Schiff family in passing. I'm a descendant of that family. Can you say a little bit more about the Schiffs within the Jewish shoe and philanthropic world?
Well, and also I will tell you a little bit in my world. They owned A.S. Beck. My father worked for them for 30 years. He was their designer of footwear and ran the factory that made the products in Haverhill, factory called Fifth Avenue Shoe. Saul Schiff, if you're a descendant of him, he was at my bar mitzvah. And of course, I knew him, got to meet him. Hello. And I would see him once in a while with my dad. They had a bunch of tickets for the Yankee games. But naturally, as my father's age or older kind of guy, there was no other relationship. But he was a great boss to my dad. I will tell you, when a man leaves that important a job, you wouldn't think that his boss would be happy about it. The Schiff family allowed my father to take 20% of the workers from their shoe factory in Haverhill, Fifth Avenue Shoe, to begin to start his own business. They could have blocked him at every turn, but they were very generous and I guess respectful of what he had been to them over the years. And that's how we got started.
Wow.
Well, I love the fact that there was a Schiff at your bar mitzvah. So hopefully Betsy is happy with that response. We also had a question submitted in advance, so I want to make sure that we address these first, and then we'll get to the live questions. So Emily asks, I have a question about the labor strife that caused some shoe factories to move up to Maine to avoid unionization in the early 1930s. My family's shoe business was one of these. My great-grandfather Samuel Shapiro moved the business over a single weekend from South Braintree to Gardner, Maine in the early 30s. His Gardner Shoe Company was the largest employer in Gardner for many years thereafter, manufacturing mostly popularly priced men's shoes until the 1970s and army boots during World War II. Do either Jonathan or Stuart, are you familiar with the Gardner Shoe Company?
Well, I'm not. Obviously it was way before I was even born, but truthfully, we thought Maine was the moccasin by the time we were in business. Maine was the moccasin capital. The Alphonse family, the Decker, topsiders, they were all in Maine, and the dressier shoes, lady shoes, were in Haverhill and Lynn and Newburyport, and then of course Brockton was the men's shoe capital. So no, I don't even know the name way before I got there.
Of course, the
And
Lowndes, whom I mentioned earlier, were in Maine as well. I don't know whether it was for the same reason or just because as an immigrant, Philip Lowndes really immigrated, whether he found a place in Maine. But it's interesting, and there's no question that there was a tension, as there often is, between the manufacturers and the workers because of the history that Stuart laid out. Of course, a lot of the owners had been workers, and they did at least understand one another.
Well, there were Haverhill made, as you pointed out, 40% of the shoes down there in that area. So not too many left, I would venture to say.
Yeah.
we have a question.
Any others?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We got a lot of questions, it looks like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Judith asks, what would it take for shoe manufacturing to return to the United States? I think that's a question for you, Stuart.
Yeah, I don't see it's not possible.
Why not?
To give you a couple of simple reasons. None of the ingredients that are needed to make a shoe are made here. You can't buy a sole, you can't buy a heel, you can't buy anything. There aren't trained workers. Now we are more technologically advanced and they don't have to be as skilled as they were when we were making shoes in Haverhill, but it's an industry that has no remnants at all other than our heritage. I can't think of anyone. I mean, America was buying its army boots from China. And there is a boot factory in Georgia that's being supported where we're making them now. But that gives you an idea. That happens to be an industry not like oil and gas and natural resources that, this administration is trying to encourage to come back, or making automobiles. We just don't have a tannery. We don't have a sole maker. We don't have a heel maker. Some people have set up mini research factories like New Balance and Nike, where they make prototypes to create design and keep it in-house so that it's not stolen in these Asian factories. But once they're ready, they'll make a small run to see how it settles and goes overseas. There would be no way to mass produce it. Sorry. Wish there was, but there's not.
Another question about why did manufacturing move from Haverhill and the North Shore up to Maine? Again, I believe
I tell you, I don't
cheaper
think it
labor.
did. Yeah.
Sorry,
but it
Stuart?
really didn't. 40% were made in our 40% were made in our area. I don't see how it didn't move. Some plants moved up there, or new factories were opened up there. But I assure you, probably for every one that moved, 2 new ones opened in the north of Boston area.
We have some wonderful questions and comments about family members who worked in the shoe business. Let's see. My father made the machinery that made shoes and held many patents. Will there be recognition of those who made the machinery? I have to
I don't
wonder
know
if
about personal, um, I'm not the curator of the museum, but there certainly will be machinery examples, mini line on show how it was made, but not necessarily, like McKay made the first stitcher and then mass produced it, and United Shoe Machinery, the big machinery maker. Those were all in the Haverhill area. We bought all our machinery in that area also. Whether they'll be recognizing the specific companies, I don't know.
My understanding is that there was a lot of tinkering, meaning in a good way, meaning that people would make small improvements that would save money, that would improve the quality of the shoe, and that there was a fair bit of that went on.
We have a question. Are there any lists of workers from the 1910s for the shoe companies in Lynn? We are trying to find out if our grandparents met working at a shoe company. I can recommend that this person write to the Jewish Heritage Center's reference desk, JHC reference at jewishheritagecenter.org. And we do have extensive archival collections about Lynn shoe companies, and we might be able to help you. So we can see if we have names, and if we can't, we could potentially refer you to other sources. Um, did you know, another question, did you know P. Clayman and Sons in Peabody? My dad was vice president. My grandfather owned a slipper factory in Lynn. His name was Samuel Chaves. I think it was called Princess Shoes. Are you familiar with these companies?
Have we
I think
lost?
we've lost Stuart,
No,
unfortunately.
I'm here. Can
Oh,
you hear
okay,
me?
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 No, I don't know them. Factories right contiguous to us was Fisher, was the people who made Papagallo shoes, Shane Shoe Company. I remember those names because we used to interview some of their employees when we needed more. But my role was an educational role. Consider my few years in Haverhill as my graduate school, something I could never have learned at the Wharton School. This is a craft, and it still is a craft. Shoemaking is a craft, and you really have to understand all the nuances, or you're going to have a product that a woman won't buy a second time, because it doesn't feel right. So that was my goal, and I didn't pay much attention outside of it. When I saw the age of the workers, I knew I was out of there. When I felt I had learned enough.
And I will say, Stuart, that your shoes are known not only as being beautiful and fashionable, but also very comfortable. It's clear that you really understood and learned the craft of making a well-made, comfortable shoe. And there are a lot of women's shoes today that you cannot say that about.
I guess
In fact,
so.
we have a couple of comments about how uncomfortable high-heeled shoes are. And
You never
Well,
heard that before.
but
No.
not yours, and I can
Uh,
attest to that. I actually here's a question that I find quite amusing. Stuart, why have you changed your lasts and no longer manufacture quadruple A widths? Um, People with narrow feet need nice shoes.
you're absolutely right. And when I was the owner of this company until a few years ago, when I sold it to Coach, we made double A's, triple A's, and quadruple A's. And I will tell you, together with size 4 and 5 and 11 and 12, our most loyal customers were these not so recognized sizes. We made every style in them, but when Coach bought the company, well, they're a corporation and they just don't get it. And they cut things out that we did all the time. We did trunk shows to make special colors for women. We made custom shoes for certain people, and they didn't want to be bothered with that. But don't blame it on me. I'm not there anymore. Blame it on Coach.
Um, we'll take just another couple of questions. Lawrence writes, my grandmother moved to the Salem Peabody area in 1913. She chose Salem because she had relatives there who worked in the leather industry. Many relatives came at the turn of the 20th century. They worked as trimmers, and it seemed like they did this work out of their home. Can you elaborate on these early Jewish immigrants and how they knew to come to this area and do this work as trimmers?
Well, if they had a history of leather work, they knew there were so many tanneries outside of Boston supplying our industry that they would be drawn there. And you are right about home work. A lot of the work in our industry was done at home. Even in our era, when my dad had the factory in the late 50s, early 60s, into 69 or so, our stitchers, we would buy machines for them, set it up at home. Every day they would come to the factory to get the threads that we needed to stitch the shoes that they were taking with them. That was the only way we could keep them working for us. They had children at home. They had things they had to do during the day. And we didn't know if they were putting the whole family to work or not. You know, the laws weren't like that in those days. And probably they were. Assembling and maybe gluing, and then the talent, of the stitching was done by the mom. But that lasted until the factories closed in the late 60s.
Same was true in the clothing industry, of course,
Yeah.
where there was a good deal of what was called piecework. And
Yes.
in a way, it was helpful to stay-at-home mothers. They could earn money and not worry, that their children would be on the street. So it had that benefit as well, but it was always a feature of these trades.
Yeah. Well,
One last
we probably would have needed a bigger factory if they all worked inside the factory.
Yeah, sorry.
One last question about factory owners. Benji asks, were there shoe factory owners who tried to implement cooperative practices like Edward A. Filene? And I'm wondering if cooperative practices means with workers. Do we know
Well, I
anything
don't know
about that?
well, companies, no, not factories. Companies evolved that said, I can make those bows better than you can, because you're really only going to make them in the season they're popular. But I'm going to set up a bow factory for everybody. And then we have business even when it's not strong, and we have business when it is strong, and we have enough workers to do it. Whereas it's not your real business. So why do you want to tie up employees making bows? And that's how bow factories evolved. And the glue factories evolved. And the checking of leather. We would buy leather and send it out to these plants that had measuring machines and inspectors circling the pit marks. We didn't have to waste that time. The leather would come back to us. We could cut it quickly and freely without having to do all that extra homework that they did. Every industry, I'm sure, has side helpers of that nature. But it's not from factories. It's from other entrepreneurs who set up businesses.
I'm wondering if this one question can be answered in one word. So Jonathan mentioned that women's shoes tended to be made on the North Shore of Boston. Men's shoe factories were on the South Shore. They required different manufacturing techniques, so they were centered in different places. Was there a center of children's shoes? That's a really
I don't
interesting
know.
question. We don't know. Okay. All right.
Where was Buster
Don't know.
Brown made?
St. Louis.
Yeah.
So was Tom
Okay.
McCann. Maybe it was St. Louis.
Yeah. But
So
that,
maybe,
again, was different. Yeah.
yep, not necessarily in the greater Boston area.
Yeah.
No.
Well, thank you both so much. There are more questions. I wish we had more time. But Stuart Weitzman, thank you so much for sharing yourself, your time, your stories. Jonathan, as always, thank you for framing the history of all of this. You both are a treasure, and it's been a delight. And I want to thank
And
everyone in the audience as well for joining us this evening.
let me thank Stephanie Kalish, who helped with the research. Brandeis student. It was great
Oh,
research.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And thank you to Stephanie. If you in the audience have further questions or want to learn more, you can contact us at, again, jhcreference at jewishheritagecenter.org, or visit our website at jewishheritagecenter.org, which has a lot of information about the Jewish shoe trades in Massachusetts and New England. I hope that you will join us again on April 7th for our upcoming program, Tracing the History of Boston Jews, Disability, and U.S. Immigration Policy, with our historian in residence, Hannah Zaves Green. That again is on April 7th coming up, and you can learn more at jewishheritagecenter.org/events. Also, very exciting, on June 5th, we are having a benefit, a fundraiser for the Jewish Heritage Center. We hope that you will save the date. Thursday, June 5th, we are honoring the 30th anniversary of the publication of The Jews of Boston, which was edited by Jonathan Sarna and Ellen Smith, sponsored by Combined Jewish Philanthropies at the time. It remains to this day the definitive history of Jewish Boston, and is a very important book. So we are honoring and celebrating the 30th anniversary of that book with a festive evening and a really interesting program, including, again, Jonathan Sarna and others. So thank you again to Stuart Weitzman and Jonathan Sarna and all of you in the audience for joining us today. When you leave this webinar, you'll be asked to fill out a very brief survey about the program, and we hope you'll take a minute to respond, as your feedback is really helpful to us in developing further programming. We will also, as we mentioned, send a link to this presentation tonight or tomorrow. Lastly, I would like to mention that it is support from people all over the world that makes possible the work of the Jewish Heritage Center to preserve and illuminate American Jewish history. So we ask you to please consider making a donation of your own at jewishheritagecenter.org/donate. And we thank you very much for your support. We hope to see you again at those upcoming programs. And until then, goodbye and be well.